My wife said I was just the backup husband, so I made a decision that changed everything. I was 36 when my wife Bryn said something during a quiet Sunday afternoon that permanently altered how I saw my life. We had been married for almost 7 years, and together for 11. Until that moment, I believed we had a solid, if unremarkable, relationship built on routine, shared history, and mutual tolerance. We lived in a modest house on the edge of town, had no children, and both worked jobs that paid the bills without inspiring much passion. I always thought stability was enough. That belief ended the moment Bryn looked at me across the kitchen table and told me I was never meant to be the first choice. The conversation did not begin dramatically. We were sorting through paperwork and old mail, trying to organize finances for the coming year. Bryn seemed distracted, tapping her fingers against the table and sighing every few minutes. I asked her what was wrong, expecting something minor like stress from work or frustration with her sister. Instead, she told me she had been feeling restless for a long time. She said she felt like her life had taken a path that was convenient rather than meaningful. I listened carefully because I believed that was part of being a good husband. Then she said something that made my chest tighten in a way I had never felt before. She told me that before she met me, she had been deeply in love with someone named Rowan. They had broken up years before we ever crossed paths, but she had never truly let go of the idea of him. According to her, he had been the one who got away, the man she imagined a future with. She said that when that relationship ended, she was heartbroken and scared of being alone. Then she met me. I was kind, dependable, and willing to commit. In her words, I was safe. She paused then and said the sentence that still echoes in my mind. She said that I had always been the backup husband. She did not say it cruelly. That almost made it worse. Her tone was calm, almost reflective, as if she was sharing a realization rather than confessing something unforgivable. She explained that she had convinced herself that love could grow out of comfort and gratitude. She married me because she believed it was the sensible choice. She assumed that with enough time the absence she felt would fade. Instead, it lingered quietly beneath everything we built together. I remember staring at the grain of the wooden table, because if I looked at her, I feared I would say something I could not take back. My mind raced through memories of our relationship, searching for signs I had missed. Moments when she seemed distant, times when she avoided conversations about the future. Her reluctance whenever someone asked about children, all of it suddenly formed a pattern I could no longer ignore. I asked her why she was telling me this now. She said Rowan had recently re-entered her life. They had exchanged messages at first out of nostalgia, then more frequently. She insisted nothing physical had happened, but admitted the emotional connection had returned quickly. She told me she felt guilty, but also alive in a way she had not felt in years. She said she needed to be honest with me because continuing to live a lie felt unbearable. The room felt too small after that. Every sound seemed amplified. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking clock on the wall, my own breathing. I asked her if she was planning to leave. She hesitated, then said she did not know. She said she wanted time to think, to understand what she truly wanted. She asked for patience and understanding, as if this were a difficult project, rather than the unraveling of our marriage. That night I barely slept. I lay awake replaying every word, searching for some misunderstanding, some way to reframe what she had said. But there was no escaping it. The woman I had built my life around had settled for me. Worse, she had known it all along. I felt foolish, exposed, and profoundly alone. Yet beneath the pain something else stirred, a quiet anger, not explosive, but steady, an awareness that I deserved more than to be someone's contingency plan. Over the next few days, Bryn acted as if things were temporarily strained, but manageable. She went to work, cooked dinner, and asked how my day had been. The normalcy felt surreal. I realized that while she was contemplating her options, I was expected to remain frozen, waiting for her decision. That realization clarified something important. If I stayed passive, I would be confirming the role she had assigned me, the backup who waits patiently on the sidelines. I began to reflect on my own life independent of her. I thought about how often I had compromised my desires to maintain peace. How many times I had deferred to her preferences without question. I remembered hobbies I had abandoned, friendships I had neglected, ambitions I had quietly shelved. I had convinced myself that sacrifice was part of love. Now I wondered whether I had simply been disappearing. One evening, I took a long walk through our neighborhood. The air was cold and sharp, and for the first time in years, I felt fully present. I considered what it would mean to choose myself. Not out of spite or revenge, but out of self-respect. I understood then that waiting for Bryn to decide whether I was enough would only prolong the damage. The decision that would change everything did not arrive as a dramatic revelation. It came as a calm certainty. I would no longer accept a life where my value depended on comparison. When I returned home, Bryn was sitting on the couch scrolling through her phone. She looked up and smiled, unaware that something fundamental had shifted. I sat down across from her and told her that I had thought carefully about what she shared. I told her that I loved her, but I refused to remain in a marriage where I was seen as a second choice. I said that I would not compete with a ghost from her past, or wait while she weighed her options. I explained that I deserved a partner who chose me fully without reservation. She looked stunned, as if she had not considered that I might make a decision of my own. She asked what I was saying. I told her that I was choosing to step away from the role she had assigned me, that whatever path she decided to follow, I would no longer be standing still. That night marked the beginning of the most difficult and transformative period of my life, though I did not yet know how far it would lead or how much it would cost. The days after that conversation moved slowly, as if time itself was uncertain how to behave around us. Bryn did not cry or shout or accuse me of anything. Instead, she became quiet in a different way than before, more cautious, more observant, as if she were studying me for the first time. I think she had assumed I would react with panic or desperation or pleading. When none of that happened, she seemed unsettled. I stayed polite and calm but distant. I slept in the guest room and spent more time outside the house than in it. The silence between us grew heavy and deliberate. She tried to talk a few times, asking what exactly I meant by stepping away. Each time I told her the same thing in different words. I was no longer willing to wait while she measured me against someone else. I was no longer willing to carry a marriage on my back while she explored unresolved feelings. I told her that I needed space to decide what kind of life I wanted next, and that decision would not be made from a position of fear. She nodded each time, but I could tell she did not truly believe I would follow through. During that week, I contacted a lawyer not to file anything yet, but to understand my options. It felt surreal sitting in a quiet office, discussing the potential end of a marriage I had once assumed would last my entire life. The lawyer spoke calmly, outlining steps and possibilities. I listened carefully and took notes. For the first time since Bryn spoke those words, I felt something resembling control. Not over her, but over myself. I also reached out to people I had drifted away from over the years. Old friends from before the marriage, colleagues. I had lost touch with neighbors I had only waved to in passing. The responses surprised me. People were glad to hear from me. They invited me out for coffee dinners, long walks, conversations that had nothing to do with my marriage. I realized how narrow my world had become and how much of myself I had tucked away to fit into a life that required me to be small. Bryn noticed the change. One evening she asked where I had been spending so much time. I told her honestly that I was reconnecting with parts of my life I had neglected. She frowned and said it felt like I was pulling away. I looked at her and said that I had been pulled away long before she admitted it. That was the first time she showed anger. She accused me of being dramatic, of throwing away years of commitment because of one poorly worded confession. I reminded her that it was not the wording that hurt, but the truth behind it. She began to speak about Rowan more openly, perhaps hoping transparency would soften the blow. She said they talked about music, memories, shared experiences. She insisted it was harmless emotional processing. I listened without interrupting, but inside something hardened. Every detail confirmed what I already knew. Her heart was not fully with me, and likely never had been. I did not feel jealousy as much as a dull disappointment. One night she asked if I was planning to leave the house. I said eventually yes, but not in a rush. I told her I wanted to leave with clarity, not chaos. She asked if there was any chance we could fix things. The question hung between us, heavy and fragile. I told her that repair requires equal investment, and that right now we were standing on opposite sides of the truth. She wanted to rewrite the past into something more palatable. I needed to accept it exactly as it was. Over the next few weeks, practical matters took center stage. We discussed finances, the house logistics. The conversations were surprisingly civil, though emotionally distant. It felt like dismantling a shared project rather than ending a love story. I moved some of my belongings into storage and spent nights at a friend's place occasionally. Each step made the situation more real and strangely more bearable. What I did not expect was how Bryn began to shift as the reality of separation settled in. She grew anxious, restless, more emotional. She asked more questions, sought reassurance, tried to reminisce about early memories, trips, laughter, moments of connection. I listened politely, but did not engage in the way she hoped. Nostalgia could not undo the present. I think she realized then that the balance had changed. I was no longer chasing her approval or fighting to be chosen. I had chosen myself, and that frightened her. One afternoon she told me that Rowan had suggested they meet in person. She watched my face carefully as she said it, perhaps expecting anger or desperation. I felt neither. I told her she was free to make whatever choices she felt aligned with her values. I said that my path forward no longer depended on her decisions. The look on her face was a mixture of relief and something like regret. That night I sat alone and reflected on how much I had learned in such a short time. I understood now that being dependable is not the same as being valued. That love offered out of fear of loneliness will always carry an imbalance. I had mistaken endurance for devotion and compromise for intimacy. The clarity was painful, but empowering. I began to imagine a future not defined by what I was willing to tolerate, but by what I deserved. A life where partnership meant mutual enthusiasm, not reluctant acceptance. Where I was not the safe alternative, but the chosen presence. That vision carried me through the uncertainty ahead. By the end of the month, I had made my decision. I would file for separation and begin the formal process of ending the marriage. Not because Bryn had feelings for someone else, but because staying would require me to deny my own worth. When I told her, she cried for the first time since everything began. She said she never meant to hurt me. I believed her. Intent does not erase impact. As I packed the last of my things and prepared to leave the house we had shared, I felt a strange combination of grief and relief. I was losing the familiar life, but reclaiming something far more important. My agency, my dignity, my future. The decision had changed everything, not just the course of my marriage, but the way I understood myself. Leaving the house was quieter than I expected. There was no dramatic final moment, no slammed doors, no last-minute confessions. I loaded my car early in the morning while Bryn was still asleep, or pretending to be. The sky was pale and empty, and the street was silent. As I pulled away, I felt the weight of years lift slowly, not all at once, but enough to notice. I did not feel free yet, but I felt honest. The first weeks on my own were disorienting. I stayed with a friend named Calder, who had a spare room and a talent for listening without trying to fix anything. He let me talk when I needed to, and left me alone when I did not. I began to build a new routine, small intentional acts that reminded me I existed outside of the marriage. Morning walks, coffee at the same quiet place, reading books I had put off for years. None of it was dramatic, but all of it was grounding. Bryn reached out often at first. Messages checking in, asking how I was sharing updates about her own life. I responded politely but briefly. I was careful not to slip back into emotional familiarity. Each conversation felt like testing a wound to see if it still hurt. It did, though, less sharply each time. She mentioned that she had met Rowan in person. She said it had been confusing, emotional, unresolved. I told her I hoped she found clarity. That was the truth, though it surprised me how little it affected me. The legal process moved slowly. Paperwork, meetings, waiting. It forced me to confront the reality of what we were ending, not just emotionally, but structurally. We divided assets, discussed timelines, signed forms. There was sadness in that, but also fairness. I appreciated that we did not fight over things that no longer mattered. The house would be sold, and the proceeds split. Our lives untangled, piece by piece. What surprised me most was how my sense of self expanded once I stopped trying to earn my place. I began to speak more honestly at work, sharing ideas I would have previously kept quiet. I reconnected with my brother, who I had seen less and less over the years. Our conversations deepened. He told me he had always sensed I was carrying more than I admitted. Hearing that hurt, but also affirmed that I was not imagining the imbalance. There were moments of grief that came unexpectedly. Seeing a couple laughing in the grocery store, hearing a song that had played at our wedding, finding an old photo while sorting through storage. I let myself feel those moments without judgment. Grief did not mean regret. It meant I had invested sincerely. I was proud of that, even as I let go. Several months in, Bryn asked to meet in person to talk. I considered it carefully before agreeing. We met at a neutral place, a quiet park, in the afternoon. She looked different, thinner, more tired, but also more uncertain. She told me that things with Rowan had not turned out the way she imagined. that the connection had faded once the fantasy met reality. She said she realized she had idealized the past because she was afraid to confront dissatisfaction in the present. I listened without interruption. When she finished, she looked at me with an expression I recognized too late. She asked if there was any chance we could try again. The question did not fill me with anger or hope, it filled me with clarity. I told her gently that I could not return to a relationship where I had already learned my place. That even if her feelings had changed, the foundation had cracked in a way that could not be repaired. I said that I wished her well, but my path had moved forward. She cried quietly and nodded. There was no argument. I think she finally understood that the decision had not been impulsive or retaliatory. It had been necessary. We parted with a brief hug that felt like closure rather than connection. As time passed, I began to imagine a future that did not revolve around avoiding pain, but pursuing fulfillment. I did not rush into dating. I focused on building a life that felt complete on its own. I traveled alone, took classes, met new people without expectation. I learned to enjoy my own company in a way I never had before. Looking back, I realized that being called a backup husband had been devastating, but also revealing. It forced me to see the truth I had ignored, that I had been present but not fully chosen, that I had mistaken endurance for love. The decision I made changed everything, not because it ended my marriage, but because it began my self-respect. I no longer measure my worth by whether someone stays. I measure it by whether I am honest with myself. That lesson came at a high cost, but it was one I needed to learn. The life I am building now is not louder or flashier than the one I left, but it is mine fully and without apology. The months that followed settled into something steady and almost quiet, in a way that once would have frightened me. There was no rush to define what came next, and no pressure to prove that leaving had been the right choice. Life simply continued, and for the first time in a long while, it continued without resistance. I moved into a small apartment on the edge of the city, with tall windows and uneven floors. It was nothing impressive, but it was entirely mine. Every object I brought in had a reason, and every empty corner felt like possibility instead of absence. I slept better there than I had in years, not because I was happier every day, but because I was no longer bracing myself each night for disappointment I could not name. Work changed too, not dramatically, but meaningfully. I found myself volunteering for projects I would once have avoided. I spoke up in meetings without rehearsing every sentence in my head beforehand. There was a promotion conversation that surprised me not because I had earned it, but because I had never allowed myself to believe I could be seen without asking. When it happened, I did not celebrate loudly. I went home, cooked dinner, and sat in the quiet, letting the moment settle. It felt earned in a deeper way than external recognition ever had before. My relationship with Calder remained one of the unexpected gifts of that transition. We did not talk every day anymore, but when we did, the conversations were honest and unguarded. He never framed my past as something to overcome or fix. He treated it as context, not a flaw. That distinction mattered more than he probably realized. It reminded me that the right people do not need you to perform resilience, they simply respect it when it appears. Occasionally, news of Bryn filtered back through shared acquaintances. She had moved apartments, changed jobs, traveled briefly, and then returned. Her life continued too, and I felt no bitterness hearing about it. There was a distant empathy, but no pull. I realized that closure is not a single conversation or moment. It is the accumulation of days lived without the old ache resurfacing. It is noticing that the story you once replayed no longer demands attention. I began dating again, eventually not with urgency, but curiosity. There were a few short connections, polite and kind but not lasting. What surprised me was how quickly I could tell when something was not aligned. I did not argue with myself anymore. I did not negotiate away discomfort. I listened and moved on without resentment. That alone felt like progress. I was no longer trying to be chosen. I was paying attention to how I felt when I chose to stay. One evening, after a long walk, I sat on my balcony watching the lights come on across the city. I thought about how much of my previous life had been shaped by the fear of being alone. That fear had kept me accommodating, patient, forgiving in ways that slowly hollowed me out. Being alone now felt nothing like that imagined loneliness. It felt spacious. It gave me room to hear my own thoughts without distortion. I understood then that solitude is only frightening when you do not trust yourself to keep you company. There were still moments when the past returned quietly. A familiar center phrase, overheard in memory triggered by something ordinary. But those moments no longer carried the same weight. They felt like reminders of a version of me who survived something difficult and learned from it. I could acknowledge him with gratitude and continue forward without dragging the past behind me. As the years unfolded, I stopped framing my life around what it was no longer. I stopped using words like aftermath and recovery. This was simply my life. It had texture and depth and occasional disappointment, like any other. But it was not defined by loss. It was defined by intention. I chose how I spent my time, who I let close, and what I accepted as normal. That choice became the quiet foundation of everything else. The irony is that being called a backup husband once felt like the cruelest thing I could hear. It reduced years of effort and commitment into something disposable. But in a strange way, it gave me the clarity I had been avoiding. It named the imbalance I had felt, but could not articulate. And once named, it could no longer be ignored. That sentence did not end my marriage alone. It ended the illusion that love was something you endure, rather than something that meets you fully. Now when I look back, I do not feel anger toward Bryn or even resentment. I feel a kind of distant gratitude for the moment that forced honesty into the open. Without it, I might still be there trying harder, explaining more, shrinking further. Sometimes the most painful truth is the one that frees you. If there is a point to all of this, it is not that leaving is always the answer, or that love inevitably fails. It is that self-abandonment is never sustainable. You can give endlessly and still be unseen. You can stay loyal and still be secondary. And the moment you finally choose yourself, the world does not collapse. It simply rearranges around the person you were meant to be all along. I used to think strength looked like staying and enduring quietly. Now I know, strength looks like walking away without cruelty and building something honest in the silence that follows. The decision that changed everything was not leaving the marriage. It was deciding that I would never again accept a role that required me to disappear. That choice continues to shape my life every day, and it is one I would make again without hesitation.